Okay, Chair.
Thank you. Bore da pawb, and good morning to everybody for this finance panel. We've got 3 or 4 main items on the agenda. But first of all, I'd like to apologies, please, Kath. You've got 2 or 3. Thank you.
Yes, we've got apologies from councillors Jeremy Pugh and Gareth Ratcliffe, and apologies from Lynn Hamilton, Lay Member Observer.
Okay, thank you very much. Karina, you're on mute.
Sorry, I've just seen a note from Lynn saying, can he join? He may be...
It's in the chat. It's in the chat box.
Okay, just bear with me. I'll see if I can get him back in.
I'll give you a moment.
There we go. Should be coming in from backstage now.
Oh, lovely.
Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I just done the introductions and apologies, and I was going to hand over straight to Kath for the second item on the agenda, election of chair. Thank you.
Okay, I can inform the panel that I've received for chair 4 nominations and seconders for the re-election of Councillor Allard as chair. Can I ask for a show of hands if everybody is in favour?
Do you want screen hands or
Screen hands or yellow hands, whichever.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think we can take that as unanimous. I think I've just had a message from Councillor Elwyn as well that he might be backstage too. But I think that's you're re-elected Councillor Allard as chair for finance panel for this year.
Thank you very much all. Thank you very much indeed. And other part of this item 2 is election of the vice chair. Do we have?
Yeah, I've got 2 nominations for Councillor Pete to continue as vice. And again, if I have a show of hands or if there are any other nominees.
Any other nominations? No. So all those in favour, either physical or Simpson's hand, whichever. Oh, yeah, me too, sorry. Right, I think that's unanimous. Thanks, Kath,
Okay.
and thanks, Pete, as well.
And thank you to the committee for re-electing me as well, Chair. So thank you all.
Great, thank you very much indeed. So item 3 on the agenda, the minutes of the meeting on the 28th of April. Just quickly, pages 3, a big page 3, 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Those are true reflection. We'll come to the action points in a moment, but are those a true reflection of that meeting? Everybody happy?
Yeah.
I can't see any dissenting voices.
No.
Right, we got a couple of action points. I'm at fault on first action point where chair and vice chair, we can have a discussion with Jane, head of finance, around the terms of reference of the committee. That hasn't happened. We'll try and sort that out very soon, since it's you and me again, Pete. So if Jane is happy to have a look.
Sorry, Allard.
Oh, hello.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a number of people in the waiting room trying to get into this meeting. If they couldn't be let in.
Yeah, we're trying to move you. It's been Zoom. We've had a few issues.
Oh, good morning, David.
Morning.
And James.
Joined you at last.
Apologies, you were in the other side of the wall in the waiting room.
Yeah, yeah.
and Connor as well. Is everybody through now?
Yes. Thank you, Chair.
Just we've taken apologies. We've gone through the chair and the vice chair, and the good news is Councillor Pete carries on as vice chair. And now we've looked at the minutes. Everybody's agreed that they're a true reflection, and we're just looking at the action points now. Action point 1 on page 4, the chair and the vice chair. We haven't done that yet. We will go away and have a discussion with Jane at the terms of reference of the group. And then we got the reference to the working group of the Governance and Audit Committee. Gareth, would you like to say a sentence on that, where you're at with those working groups? Thank you.
Yes, we're about coming to an end on the work following up from an internal audit report on highways, and there's been a very good interchange with officers there. So it looks as if we're satisfied now with the actions that they've taken in response to that audit, and there'll be a follow-up audit to validate that. Work is still ongoing on the lessons learned from the Heart of Wales service HOPES, and we're liaising with an internal group that's looking how that's bedding in now it's been taken back into the council. So I think we'll be able to report on that shortly. I chair the capital working group, and very early on we made the distinction between how the council's existing asset base is, what it is and how it's managed, and then we looked at new projects in the capital programme which add to that base and how they're procured and the financing of them. It's been a steep learning curve, but very informative. There's an awful lot of very good practice going on out there across the council. For example, post-COVID, the way the council's been rationalising the estate, how it's been working with other bodies to get full occupation and subletting and renting out. Classic example is County Hall, where they secured jobs, and I think it's £1 million worth of investment there. So a lot of that, I don't think enough people know about it. It would be good to get a higher profile on that. But yesterday at our meeting, we reflected on where we've been and where we want to get to. And it was the consensus now that what we don't want to do with the working group is second guess any other work that's going on, which maybe has more resources being put into it. And that was particularly around the asset review of the council, which I understand has been in train for quite some time. So we'd really like to get a handle on where it is and when it's likely to be published, because that's important, so we can cross-reference into that. And the other thing is very much aware, for example, we've looked into the procurement of the schools capital programme, 9-year rolling programme, very ambitious programme, big numbers involved in that over the next 9 years. And it's really looking in more detail then at not just the business planning process, but the 5-year medium-term budget. And for capital programme, you really need a 10-year programme. So the other dimension to this is all of this will be put in context with the work that's ongoing with the what is now called the Sustainable Powys project. And really it's asking the question then, about the corporate plan priorities and how these are translated into actions and the outcomes from them, and what assets are needed to be retained to best deliver those outcomes for the benefit of the residents of Powys. And the other side of that coin is what assets need to be further rationalised or disposed of to generate that additional cash to contribute to these budget demands. And there's a lot of things in between as well. Possibility of going into third-party ownership or different trusts and different status. So we're taking stock, and what we really like to know is what is the status of the asset review? Is that something that will be released soon, or is it something longer term?
Okay, great. And it's that capital program I think the finance panel are most interested in, to be honest. So you know, if you could keep us updated and informed, and hopefully we can drop it into the forward work program when progress is made on the asset review. And I could see the House report. I could see something in the press over the last couple of days around that as well. And the highways is probably more of a service issue. Karina, you're on mute.
As a new panelist, I can ask some extremely basic questions, and there may not be time at all. But I'm just wondering, when you talk about assets, are you talking about county farms? Are you talking about Gwalia? What sort of examples?
Yeah, that's the small holding estate is one example. There's also other holdings, like the council owns and manages quite an area of forestry. So as well as building, it occupies for itself. We're not looking at council housing, social housing, but the small holdings estate is one of the. That's what we're interested in, what the asset review says about that.
And when did you say it would be published, do you feel?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's the question we've asked from yesterday.
Okay, thank you so much.
It's for the newer councillors. It's been long waited. It must be 3 years, possibly 4. I'm not sure. James, you had your hand up a moment ago. Did you want to add to that, or was that about Karina's sort of question and what's contained within that?
So the asset review is purely looking at buildings and properties, isn't it? But the capital program has other assets. It has vehicles, it has equipment, IT, things like that in there as well. So just a broader thing of what's in the capital program compared to what the asset review is actually looking at.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gareth. Any other comments on Gareth? Would just look forward to you completing the work and helping us inform the finance panel and also the reimagining of Powys as well. So thank you very much.
Sure.
The next action down the list, at the top of page 9, I think, was head of service to have a discussion about the Powys Health Board contracts and uplifts. But has that happened? I think it was with Councillor Pugh, wasn't it, from memory? No, it hasn't happened.
Conversation hasn't happened yet, no.
Okay. I wouldn't mind being part of that conversation, just to keep me on top of the stuff.
Okay.
Please, Jane. I think there's actions on the last page, page 10. Grant advice notes I've received. Was that circulated to the whole committee? Or that was just to myself and Kath, perhaps?
I think it was just to you, Chair, only because I think we gave you some information. You may want a bit more, but it was whether you wanted it across the board, because there was quite a number of them. So I sort of just testing how much detail you want for potentially each of those grants. So we can pick that up again.
Yeah, it came through.
It was early this week, yeah.
Yeah, Monday, Tuesday sometime. Yeah, what I wanted also on that was dates as well, but okay. I'll catch up with you again on that.
Okay.
The next bullet point there was the information on receipt of the 2.2 million capital efficiency. Well, we can pick that up at the same time, can't we?
Okay, yeah.
Heads of service to review comments in relation to funding returned to Welsh Government and advice.
Yeah. There was a comment made that grants had been returned. Now, I've had some conversations. I didn't have detail from the member that queried it on the day. I have asked. There was a very small amount of grant returned, but we don't like returning grants. We usually have discussions to make sure that we can maximise any funding that we receive. So I think I need to approach the member to see if they have a little bit more detail, but I wasn't able to uncover anything that was being mentioned at that time.
Okay, it's the relationship between Welsh Government and UK Government. There's always that story in the news, isn't it, about a capital money being returned, sort of thing. And so it doesn't relate to us as much. I'm quite certain with that. The fourth bullet point was around the Bro Hithgain capital project delivery timescales. Head of service will request information and forward to panel. I haven't seen anything on that at all. No.
James, we didn't do anything on that, did we?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, we'll pick that up again.
I should have chased you up. Apologies, Jane. We'll catch up on that again. So thank you very much. Any other comments on the minutes, members? Nope. Item 4, disclosures of interest. Any interests? If you're not aware of them at the moment, please shout if you become aware of something during the meeting. Item 5, financial outturn, the revenue. Jane, how are you taking us through that? Or David, did you want to say a couple of words up front? It's been to Cabinet already, hasn't it?
Yes, it's been to Cabinet. I can do an overview on it and precede the actual report because it's quite a detailed report, or perhaps Jane would like to talk us through it and she can add to it as we go through. It's entirely up to Jane.
I know we usually go through each paragraph at a time. I'm having difficulty getting the report up. My system has just taken me out of the agenda, so bear with me. I'm just trying to go and find the report through other means, which I'm sure I will be able to. I don't know if you want to make any comments initially while I'm doing that, David?
Only to say that it was, for myself, the actual outturn I think was far better than expected, a little bit too good in some ways, because I take the view that certainly a deficit isn't to be wished for, but a large surplus sometimes doesn't necessarily point to particularly good management. But there were reasons for that, and if you go back, I think to Q1 last year, when it became very apparent we were forecasting potentially a £7 million deficit at year end, and there was a call to arms, so to speak, as far as services were concerned, to try and tighten their belts and create as many efficiencies as possible. And in fairness to them, they did succeed in doing that. And the reason for that obviously was not particularly anything to do with the budget being inadequate. It was because of forces, economic forces, with regard to inflation, the war in Ukraine, etc., etc. They were putting enormous pressures on the budget. So they did contribute to this underspend. But on top of that, and the main part of it, it's obviously from Welsh Government grants coming in and other grants coming in very, very late in the year. But what it does do, it does set us up well for future years, because we've still got significant pressures, financial pressures to face, and managing the budgets is still going to be very, very difficult. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Jane, have you?
I have now, yes. I don't know what's happened to the agenda, but I've got the master report up now. So I'm not going to repeat much of what Councillor David has already picked up on. It was an extremely challenging year for us. The final outturn does report a net underspend after contributions to specific reserves of 6.7 million. So against the budget, that's a 3% variance, and that excludes schools and the housing revenue account. It was an improved position from that reported in February, and that was as a result of some additional grant funding that came through, as we said, from Welsh Government and from the UK Government in terms of the Shared Prosperity Fund. We didn't have confirmation of that until quite late in the year. So once we knew that we had it, obviously we could reflect that within our accounts. As Councillor David said, the position has released funding to support mainly the pay award negotiations that are ongoing through into 23-24. So the base budget set for 23-24 recognised inflationary pay award pressures. However, the negotiations have exceeded some of those assumptions. So setting aside much of the money that we've underspent will help support those costs in 23-24. They will only support the budget for 1 year, but of course those pay awards are an ongoing pressure. So we do have then an additional gap in our budget plan for 24-25 that will need to be considered alongside the gap that already existed on that plan. Other part of the underspend, again, based on a principle set previously, will put any underspend against the capital elements of our revenue budget. So to support borrowing or minimum revenue provision, that will be transferred to the capital reserve. And that reserve will be drawn on to help support the capital programme in future years and actually minimise borrowing requirements there, which will obviously help the budget in the longer term. The table in section 3 sets out delivery against budget across all of the council services. Probably the highlights there are that for children's services, we did see an overspend against that budget of just over 2 million. Some of that was relating to the inability to deliver against some of the savings that were proposed during the year. And we have taken action where that is no longer possible to make those savings. They have been written out of the budget plan in 23-24, so that removes that level of risk. Other areas you see there are underspends reported. The biggest underspend reported across all of that is under corporate activities, and that is where we hold the risk budget. And also the capital element that I mentioned previously is held there as well. So that's why you see that 4 million underspend on that particular area. Then looking at the use of the surplus, you see 2.3 million goes into capital, 3.8 goes into the pay award reserve. And then the balance on transformation funding that was not spent during the year will be rolled forward to meet future transformation costs. So that's already been allocated in the new financial year. Just a note there at the bottom of table 1, you see that the housing revenue account ended the year with a slight surplus. That will go into the housing revenue account reserve, and also schools delegated budgets also reported a 2.6 million variance against budget there as well. I will pick up on school budget plans.
Can I stop you there, Jane? Just for members, there's a lot of information in that table. Any questions at this point? I can't see any. Chris.
Just going back to the children's services line, obviously there was an expectation that they would save an additional 2 million, and they've said that they can't do that. Comes back to my initial on there about, were those plans realistic in the first place when they were set? So obviously something has changed in the meantime. Was that because of rising cost and inflationary pressures causing that? Were they've had to then retract in? Or is it because different contracts had come in which were more expensive from elsewhere? Or is it around demands of needs of those individuals on the, I mean, I do sit on the Health Scrutiny Committee, but I think it's just trying to make sure that when these plans are set, they are realistic, and we are monitoring them on a regular basis, so that it's not at the end of the year we discover we got a £2 million shortfall, because that means then we're going back to reserves on there. So it's about making sure that these are on track right from the word go, and the support needed in there, Chair.
Yeah, no, point really well made. The actual cost reductions can be seen in table 2. It's the 1.5 million that wasn't achieved. But so there's additional costs on top of that to create that £2 million gap, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jane. I know you can't go into detail of the children's services. You probably need to go to the head of service there, really. But
yeah, I think what we can say is, when savings are proposed at the beginning of the year, obviously a full impact assessment is undertaken. Any risk will be reported within that. We do stretch our savings plans as much as we can, but we do acknowledge that there is then a risk of delivery. And I think in terms of this particular service, they've reported quite early on in the year the risk around that delivery. So it was highlighted early, and we've considered that then going through the budget through the year. There is some commentary from the head of service in Appendix A, and there is some,
19,
there's some further commentary in Appendix C, where we look at some of those savings that will be delivered now in the new year. So they are expecting to deliver some, but as I said, there was quite a level that we are looking that potentially now cannot be delivered. So that was written out. I think 1.6 million was written out at budget setting for 23-24.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. I fully accept what Councillor Chris is pointing out there with regard to the deliverability of savings, but I think with regard to children's services, it's such a volatile area. It is extremely difficult to get it right sometimes, but I was quite pleased, and those of you who are on this call who were at governance and audit, we did do a deep dive into children's services, and I was very encouraged to hear that they're hoping to come in with a slight underspend at the end of Q1 this year, which is a positive, because we've been struggling with children's services finance for some years now. So we've had some changes made there with regard to senior officers, etc., etc. So let's hope that going forward that'll be a positive. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Just before you move on from this section, Jane, I assume there were sort of reserves put aside because you didn't know what to cover any pay inflation. Were those not adequate to cover all pay inflation or not?
For pay inflation last year, and get my years mixed up now because we're straddling a few years at the moment, but yeah, we did. All the pay was covered within last year. So we did draw on some of those reserves. I can't remember the figures off the top of my head as to how much we did, but we did set aside some to manage that. But the biggest gap is now moving into the new financial year.
Yes, and there were reserves set aside in the this Feb's budget.
Yes, yeah.
For that, but you fear those will not be adequate to.
The what we've set aside, we hope will cover those increased pay awards. So based on the budget that we increased anyway, so the base budget was increased by a certain percentage, and then this extra 3.8 million, we hope that will be sufficient. But of course, there are still negotiations ongoing, so that's yet to be seen. But we have more assurance that we can manage those costs with that reserve.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Sorry, and any other questions before Jane moves on? No, thank you, Chair.
Can I just say, Chair,
we've got Pete as well. Go on, David, first.
With regard to, just to finish off on that, to the pay awards, etc., coming into this financial year, obviously it hasn't been settled with the unions yet, but it's just worth bearing in mind the need for this reserve, because I think that every 1% increase over and above what we actually budgeted for is going to cost us about £1.5 million, which is quite significant.
It's gone up to 1.5 million now, is it? Oh.
yeah, that's with the teachers and other stuff.
Okay. Thank you, David. Pete.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I had three, if I may, please. I'll try and keep them short for memory. Just for my clarity, the 6.7 million underspend, I think the report says it's to address increasing pressure on the 23-24 budget. So the first question I had for my clarity is if we didn't have that 6.7 million, where would the money come from if we didn't have that? The second question I have is when I look at table 1, there's variances that are pluses, minuses, quite big variance as well. So I wonder, do we learn lessons from those variances to understand why those variances are there? And do they then go into sort of future budgeting exercises? So as I guess the taxpayer, for example, isn't at risk from a bad budget when we're setting council tax? And then thirdly, if I may, Chair, I just wanted to explore Councillor David's call to arms comment when he was talking. And my question there would be, what would have happened if we hadn't had the call to arms to get the savings from heads of services? Because for me, I guess, surely that should be embedded in our culture, that we're always looking at where we can save things. And in effect, we shouldn't really need a call to arms. We shouldn't just let things drift along. We should always be looking to make savings. So, yeah, thank you, Chair.
I don't know who wants to take that up.
Shall I answer the call? Shall I answer the call to arms one? The point I was trying to make there was that obviously, with regards to the budget setting, service heads had obviously already included efficiencies and savings within that budget setting process, but it became very, very apparent that the pressures we were going to experience would require an effort over and above that, and they did deliver. But as I mentioned, most of the delivery came through, most of the underspend came through grants and not necessarily from efficiencies created within services. But I think it's a fair point, and we've made this point, that where they did make efficiencies over and above what they'd already identified, there is a need now to carry those forward into future financial years. It goes without saying, and whether you call that lessons learned or just greater efficiency and showing that we can do things for less. But yes, it's a fair comment, and we will be looking to services to carry on with that efficiency drive in future years. With regard to the earlier comment, I think regarding the £6.7 million underspend, if we hadn't had that, what would we do? Where would we get it from? I'm sure Jane will develop this further, but the way I see that, a lot would be dependent on the Welsh Government's settlement, which we've already received. But I guess if you're going to carry that through the financial year, we'd have to make further efficiencies, or in the following year have to increase council tax even higher than we might intend doing. But I'm sure Jane will develop that a little further.
I know I've made the comment in the past whether there was a slightly overreaction and services weren't delivered. For example, capital programs were slightly delayed, etc., and those new facilities will be delayed for the residents, because, you know, in a way, I know from a council taxpayer's point of view, they will see underspend equivalent of more than 6% in the council tax, and clearly there's a little bit of elements of concern. But again, as Section 151 officer, I know, Jane, you would be. It's very important to you around the sustainability of the council and the risks involved. But sorry, go on, Jane. You were going to.
If I can come in. So if we hadn't delivered the budget in the way that we have, there would be a risk that we would have to look to our general fund reserves. The general fund reserve is just under £10 million, so it's not significant in the scheme of our overall budget plan. It's around 4%, so that's what we would have to draw on. That then would increase pressure on future years, and that would have an impact potentially on council tax levels in the future. So it's important not just to focus on one particular year, but to have that longer term view in terms of financial resilience, because you wouldn't want to have overspends this year that then would suggest we might have to put council tax by even more in the following year to bring our budgets back in line. So the call to arms, as we're calling it, really asks services, services allocated a budget at the beginning of the year. They have plans in which they will deliver against that. But we basically said to them, you need to look at those plans and see what you can actually not do for part of the year as well. If there's expenditure you were going to incur, if there is not a significant level of risk of not doing that, then please don't do it just yet. So those were the types of conversations that we had with services. We also, and generally, to be fair, our services do look to this when there is opportunity for additional funding from elsewhere via grant or any other means. They generally do look at how that can best support the council and how they can use that money effectively to not draw on our own resources. And services have got very good at that. But you don't always know about those opportunities at the beginning of the year. So again, those are things that can change during the year. And as you've seen here, some of that has really benefited the council during this year. Whether those grants will be forthcoming in future years, I think it's less likely. As we know, the public purse is under considerable pressure, so we may not see the level of additional funding coming through as we have in previous years. So it's to bear that in mind. I just wanted to pick up two on the lessons learned. The first thing I've done as a result of the outturn is to go through each of the service budgets and understand where expenditure was underspent. Firstly, to ensure that those underspends, if they are continuing, are they already captured in next year's plans as efficiencies? I don't know if it's good or bad, but most of them already are. I was hoping there would be additional opportunity there for us, but that is something we've clearly looked at, and that's where perhaps demand didn't grow as much as we expected. That's already reflected in next year's budget plan as not being required. So absolutely, we take those lessons learned and look at those budget plans as we go through the year. So I just want to give you that assurance, really.
Thank you. Are you going to put that into some sort of a report? So
it would be, yeah. As we develop the plans going forward, I will be setting out exactly what we've looked at. And that too is around the pressures, and where we funded pressures. Was it required? Is it still required? So it's just about, where efficiency opportunities exist or where pressures are lower, then absolutely. Energy is a key one there. We've built a level of inflation into the 23-24 year for energy. As energy costs start to fall, we will be reviewing that. And it may well be that we'll realign budgets during this year if that opportunity arises again, which will help us start to bridge that gap in next year's budget, because 24-25 has at least a £10 million gap based on what we're currently looking at.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate councils, public services are all under extreme pressure, finance pressures as household budgets, and
absolutely
from the council taxpayer point of view, I think they probably prefer to see the money sitting in their own bank account rather than in the powers reserves. But that's just an aside, really. But Pete, coming back to you, any follow-up on your concerns addressed there?
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. No, thank you, Jane, and thank you, Councillor David. No, I was happy with the answers I got, Ali. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Jane. Please carry on.
Okay, I just see, I don't want to go over anything we've done again. I think we've touched on the cost reductions. The table is there. So delivery at 78%. And again, as I said, we've reviewed all of those and some have been written out, some have been carried forward because we do have that assurance that they can be delivered in the new year. The reserves table is therefore shown in section 5. And that shows, as I said, the general fund reserve represents 4.2% of our revenue budget. So that's in line with the principle that we've set to maintain it at least at 4%. Appendix C gives you far more information. There is further information then around schools. As I said earlier, schools did plan to draw quite heavily on their reserves during last year. I think initially we were expecting 4 or 5 million to be taken out of reserves, but actually schools drew 2.3 million out of their reserves. And that reduced the overall balance of 8.6 million at the beginning of the year. So schools reserves stood at 6.295 million at March 23. So that was the position on school reserves.
Yeah, we've been around the bush a number of times with the school reserves, but I guess they adopt the same principle as a council. They receive money late in the financial year as well, don't they? And
there was some of that,
yes. Reticence to put those in the balance sheet before it actually hits the bank account. But thank you. Any questions on the schools at this time? I know Learning and Skills are looking at it as well. So thank you, Jane. Please, yeah, please go ahead.
Transformation, as I already mentioned, there was an underspend against the transformation budget that has been transferred into the new year, and all the projects have now been allocated transformation funding that's already taken place to move those projects forward. Section 7 then set out a number of environments. These were all approved by Cabinet. I won't go through those in detail, Chair, unless anybody's got any questions on those. And then finally, we've got a little bit about capital, but I think as we're going to look at the capital report, I'll leave that. You know, the capital has an impact on revenue. This shows the impact on revenue, but James will probably go through that in a little more detail when we get to the capital report. And then finally, we highlight some of the key financial risks moving forward. And I think we've already touched on many of those as we've had the conversation so far. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jane. Comments from members? Any hands at all? Can I just make a quick comment? There's always that discussion about the adequacy of the Appendix A. Whether it's very variable, isn't it, between the various areas? But
it is.
I know you're always on that one, Jane, but there's always.
There's room for improvement.
Okay, Chris.
Well, just to say again, it's a positive report overall. I mean, the position is better than what was anticipated, as previously said. So, you know, I mean, it should be congratulations going on to the team that's behind it, and to those service heads for delivering some of that on there. I think we're mindful to keep a watching brief on the reserve levels, because without these grants coming in, it will put additional pressures on. So I think we can't take our eye off the ball type of thing. And with the 1.5 officer, she's keeping us focused on that on there. In relation to reserves, and I know our reserves are one of the, when we've compared it with other councils, ours are quite low compared to other areas. At what point would Jane and her team flag up to us that we would need to do something in relation to reserves to increase them? And what are the implications of doing that? Because it's not now, it's in probably another 12 months, 18 months time that issue would come to address. So we need to be planning for that now.
Yeah, I mean, as part of budget setting, council has, my opinion, in terms of the robustness of the reserves held by the council at that point in time. And that review is done on an annual basis. There are many factors that play into that. You know, when we're looking at future settlements, we have to be mindful of that. when we know the impact of inflation and all of those cost pressures on the council, we have to be mindful of that. So we do that on an annual basis, and it's my responsibility to flag up if at any point I feel that there are insufficient reserves to manage the level of risk that the council is holding, then that would be my responsibility to raise that on that annual basis. So that's basically the position. We can't say when or if that point in time may come. You know, it is continual, and we keep that under constant review.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Karina.
Sorry, just as a new panel member again, Chris mentioned that we got low reserves compared to other councils, like half, or what sort of? Are they like savings accounts reserves? They're not really.
Are they what? Sorry.
Are they like savings accounts or assets, or what would you say?
They are. The reserves are made up of unders and overs over many years. So it's the cash that we've had surplus at some point, and they are held then in those savings accounts, if you like. They are a bit like savings accounts, not exactly, but they are there. We were in the bottom quartile when it was last reported. Now we will have some data out based on the outturns for every council for last year. There is a benchmarking tool that we can access to show where we are compared to others. So that's something we will look to do. So until we've reviewed it again now this year, we'll be able to see where we are in terms of that position across all of Wales.
Thank you. So it's just a bit risky for us.
It's assessing, and different councils will have different analysis, different levels of risk and different circumstances. So it's a difficult one to compare, but it's just being mindful if we feel they are appropriate ourselves to manage the risk that we carry.
It's about dealing with risk, really, isn't it? And you'd be amazed at the variation between various local authorities.
Yeah.
Huge reserves in some, and very minimal in others. But different organisations produce reports on this, and along with Wales Audit. So there's reports there you can dig into, and you can always look at the annual accounts of every local authority, dig into those, and you can see the reserves level. You know, some of our neighbouring councils have huge reserves, but others up in the very north have very small reserves as well. So we're top of the bottom third, I'd say, or top of the bottom quarter.
Well, we'll have a look. We'll have a look now and review it.
Good. Right. Any other questions on this section of the revenue outturn for the financial year? This is the actual outturn. This is not what we see throughout the rest of the year, which is a
forecast. Yeah.
So there should be no variation between this and the accounts produced slightly later on. I'm sure that your team are working extremely hard on the accounts at the moment. So
it's deadline today for the draft.
Of course it is. Last day of the month, isn't it? I didn't realize that. Yeah, that deadline date has been coming forward slightly over the years, hasn't it? But it's been 30th of June for a couple of years now.
Yeah, I think it's being reviewed as well now. We were expecting earlier close downs to come quite very tight, but I think the plan is now that we may see those not being as tightened quite as much as we expected. So yeah.
Well, it's slightly frustrating because you have these tight deadlines, and then Wales Audits don't get around to. They've got pressures on their systems as well, and they don't produce the audited accounts or sign them off until much later. But
I think we've got the deadline this year for the audited accounts is as far as the 30th of November. So yeah.
No comment. Right. Jane, is it if there's no one action point from this, so far as I'm concerned, it'd be good to see your analysis of the where savings have been delivered within in year and that sort of stuff, Jane, you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Any other action points we need to pick up from this at all, members? No, I see one or two shakes of heads. So, so it'd be good to see that, Jane. Thank you.
Okay.
Right, shall we hand over to James now with the capital? Brilliant, James. Welcome, James.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is the outturn position of the capital programme at the 31st of March. So back in, I don't know, 3rd of March 2022, there was an originals programme of just under 134 million, of which 25 million was the HRA. The spend at the end of the year was a total of 65 million, of which 15 was the HRA. You can see the breakdown there in table 2.2, which services were and how much budgets they had remaining. The majority, any sort of underspends have been rolled forward into future years. Table 2.5 sets out how we finance the capital programme. So just over half of it was 54% was funded by grants, 13% was funded from revenue. It says 0% from capital receipts, and just over a third of it was financed from borrowing, 21 million, which is a drop from where it was at the beginning of the year. But it's an ongoing pattern that we tend to get grants and things during the year, and the borrowing tends to drop down a little bit. Section 3 sets out the grants we've received since the last report, and section 4 sets out the funding that's been carried forward from 22-23 to 23-24. Section 5 covers the environments. So every annual capital programme has what we call small capital bids, £500,000 for that. The Capital Oversight Board ask for expressions of interest, and these are then prioritised, and this is how the £500,000 for 23-24 is going to be allocated. There was a further requirement to do some work to the roof of the community equipment store, so that's 0.22 million, and that will be funded from existing capital budgets you've seen above in the adult services. So capital receipts, just under 3 million was received in 22-23, including just under 400,000 for the HRA. There are, at the end of the year, there was 1.14 million sales still agreed, but they hadn't fallen over the line by the end of the financial year, but we'll expect to receive them in 23-24. There's had some head of service commentary then in Appendix A, and I think that takes us through most of the report.
Great, thanks, James. Jane, nothing to add at this moment? Members, comments on that report? Sorry, Karina, did you? You're mute, Karina.
Yeah, sorry, no, I'm just interested in the children's services, but I think you're going to go into that possibly with the residential.
No, go for it now. Okay,
no, it was just good to see that there's going to be residential places within the county, and that will save money. Have I got that correct? Yeah.
Yes, it's part of the bringing them closer to home type project. I can't remember, it might be rebadged by now, but it's been an ongoing thing for 3-4 years probably, if not longer. So and a bit of support from March comment around that as well, wasn't there? I think. Any other comments on this at all? Just quickly, a little bit of capital receipts were used 100k were used to help fund the capital programme. Where's the rest of the capital receipts gone?
They're held on the balance sheet to be used in future years.
So why wouldn't you use them now to, well, like the council is under borrowed to some degree, isn't it? Why wouldn't you put them into straight to help reduce the borrowing?
I think we looked at it on balance and looking at borrowing rates. Borrowing rates were continuing to rise.
but we expect them to fall at some time in the future. So the thought process around that was reviewing what we held and just thinking about that longer term view again, and holding them to bridge that gap, if we like. So we thought with rates still rising, it was more beneficial to draw them potentially in the new financial year, or also look to see how effectively they can be used for some of the smaller projects, or even for transformation if need be. So it was just sort of keeping those options open at this stage.
Okay, but there's obviously a cost to that, isn't there?
Yeah, but it was working out, just establishing where that highest cost might fall.
What is the Public Works Loans Board's rates at the moment? Have they moved?
I think the last borrowing we did at the end of March was 4.2%, 4.5%, somewhere around that. It's bobbing up and down between 4 and 5% at the minute for most, anything from 1 to 2 years to 50 years. So we only borrowed for a 2-year time frame, and they're expecting within 18 months to 2 years for that to drop back down to around 2.83%.
And what is the long ones? Is that a bit more stable, the sort of 50-year borrowing?
They're all around that sort of 4.5 to 5%,
Okay.
whether it's 2 years, 25 years, 50 years, it's all around that sort of mark, really.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, I was just a bit of personal interest, really. Any other questions from members? No. The underspends on the capital programme, they're fully committed, are they? And they will be spent in this financial year. We're
going to work with services to do some reprofiling. There's some reprofiling needed within schools that we've already mapped out what needs to happen, just to realign with planned construction dates. And we'll work with all services, because we only reported 69% spend against the full year budget, so that needs that's not really acceptable, so we need to bring that down. So whilst these funds are committed to those schemes, whether we need them in 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26, that's where we're trying to get that profile reset now and more realistic.
Yeah, I probably heard that once or twice before.
Yeah.
The ambition of heads of service is far greater than the deliverability of some of these projects. I know that it's complex, but the funding identified there will be used in those areas, or are there areas of savings there or not?
If there are underspends against projects, that money will be recovered. So, these are allocated based on project costs, but if those costs differ, then either the money is taken back into the overall capital pot, and you see environments routinely where there are such changes at an individual project level.
And obviously it's actively managed by James and his team.
Yeah, so if you had a look at the environment in 5.2, adults were asking for more money for a roof. We said, no, you haven't spent what you've had for a few years now. Use that first, and when you want more money, come and ask us for more money at that point in time. And if the project is viable, then that's the case. So we're being hard on them and not giving them any more than they need.
That probably sums up section 151 office perfectly. Right, thank you, members. Any other comments on this report, or we'll move on? No. Brilliant. Thanks, Jane, and especially thanks to James and his team. Thank you very much for your work on this. Item 7 is forward work programme. We did mention when we were talking about minutes the working groups for from the governance and audit. I guess that will probably fall into the November one now, is it? I'm guessing, Gareth, but if just put something in there, Kath, for October, November, just to keep us up to speed on that sometime. Thank you. Any other comments on the forward work programme, members? No. Oh, sorry, Pete, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wonder if we could just add the review of the terms of reference in there to just give us an end date for that.
Yes, good idea. Why is September in red, Kath?
We're waiting for the date to put in a meeting for the performance and risk reports.
Okay.
And they've got to go to cabinet the following week, so it might be that we have to look at and maybe put another meeting in. But at the moment, we're just sort of going through all of those documents with Win as to what needs to be planned for where. But it's across all committees. We've got a short turnaround of about a week.
Okay, brilliant. In terms of reference, do we do it end of July or end of September?
Okay.
Pete, I'm guessing you say end of July. Or is that
probably guessed quite correctly there?
Is that a full meeting, this benchmarking review against what? Sorry, what's the OLAs in Wales? Other
local authorities.
I was going to say
it's.
I was going to say the local authorities, but I've never seen it OLA before. Okay. Other LAs, I would have said, but okay. Thanks, Kath. So we slot that in. Put a bit of pressure on myself and Jane and Pete to deliver on that. So
okay.
And any members who have comments or interest in that, please let me know, and we'll accommodate the comments or come and join us as well. Brilliant. Thanks. That's all for that. Unless there's other comments on the forward work programme. No. We'll go into, apologies, I was trying to find the wording. We need the next section on the agenda is updates on the reimagining work, but it has to go into confidential session. So I'd ask a member to propose that we do go into that confidential session.
Yeah, happy to go, Chair.
We've got 3 or 4 hands up. Thank you all. So thank you for anybody who's been watching this webcast. And apologies, but we'll end it there and we'll go into a confidential session. Many thanks all. Thank you.